Hello, everybody. Today, I would like to tell you about Rudy. Rudy was one of 15 children, although 2 of his siblings died in early childhood. Rudy was raised on a ranch in a family of migrant workers, and so they had very little money. There was no bathroom inside, and when his shoes became too small, the solution was to cut the ends of his shoes off so that he could continue wearing them. To help bring food into the family, they would glean from the fields that they were working on, and sometimes his father would even pick what we would consider weeds so that his mom could cook them in soup. In elementary school, his family could not afford to pay for school lunches. And so the school was, we'll say, gracious enough to allow the children to earn their school lunches. Every day from 5 o'clock to 11 o'clock p.m., they would clean the school. However, he did learn an important lesson doing this. One evening when he was cleaning the bathroom, some children were making fun of him for cleaning the bathroom. However, Mr. Pomeroy, Rudy's 7th grade teacher and a recently returned lieutenant from the Vietnam War, stepped in, and he emphatically complimented Rudy. He complimented his hard work ethic, his attention to detail, and told him he'd never seen a cleaner bathroom. Rudy beamed with pride, and he learned that he could take pride in any task he did, no matter how large or small, as long as he did his best. In fact, to this day, Rudy still enjoys cleaning bathrooms and is still very proud of how well he can do it. Little did he know, however, that Mr. Pomeroy would continue to play a role in his life. For Rudy and his siblings, the small joys were in the world around him. He enjoyed swimming in the ditch by his ranch, and he remembers that his favorite toy was the abandoned tires that he found on the ranch that he could roll around. The children were expected to help contribute to the family and contribute to their work from an early age. And so here, too, Rudy learned to find joy in the tasks that he had to complete. One of his tasks was helping to fill the bags of cotton and empty them into a trailer such as this. When he was lucky, he remembers being asked with his siblings to jump into the cotton, walk around it, and stomp it down. And he has very fond memories of this activity, especially as he got to do it with his siblings. In the summers, Rudy and his family would go on vacation to California. However, for him, this vacation entailed following the crops, usually grapes, and staying in an abandoned house that had no electricity and no running water. His 2 parents and 7 siblings, ranging in age from 4 to 16, would ride in California in a car such as this. He thought he was very lucky when he had the opportunity to either ride in the back window of the car or in the trunk with it cracked open. When Rudy was 17, his father got injured and could no longer work to support the family. And so Rudy made the difficult decision as a sophomore to drop out of high school. And yes, he was a 17-year-old sophomore because when he was in kindergarten, he didn't speak English, and so they held him back. Rudy made this decision, and it was especially difficult for him because he had just started a drawing class, and he was so excited to take this drawing class. He had originally wanted to take photography, but when he showed up to class the first day without a camera that he couldn't afford, they sent him out of the classroom. So now Rudy began working in a lumber yard. For 2 years, he worked in a lumber yard for $2.25 an hour. And for those 2 years, every single paycheck he ever made went directly to his mom to help support his family. At one point, when Rudy was working, he began to cry, and he asked himself, is this it? I'm going to end up working in a lumber yard for the rest of my life. This was a very hard realization for Rudy because ever since the 3rd grade, he had dreamed of becoming a police officer. He wanted nothing more to be a police officer, and now he saw that dream slipping away from him. However, in that moment, he made up his mind that he would not give up and that he would keep trying, even if he didn't necessarily know what that meant or what he needed to do. In small-town Queen Creek, the local elementary school was a popular hangout place for high school students, where they would catch up with their friends and they would visit with their old teachers. And so when most of Rudy's friends were preparing for graduation, he went to visit his old teacher, Mr. Pomeroy. When he walked into the classroom, he found Mr. Pomeroy having a conversation with one of Rudy's other friends. And the other friend was telling his teacher, I have no desire to ever go to college. I do not want to go. Rudy interrupted the conversation, and he told him, go to college. What are you going to do if you don't? If I could go to college, I would go in a minute. Well, Mr. Pomeroy stopped and he turned to Rudy, and he told him, "You can go to college." Rudy didn't know that was a possibility. Mr. Pomeroy told him about the GED, and Rudy began to feel hope. But Mr. Pomeroy didn't stop there. Mr. Pomeroy asked Rudy what he was doing the next day, and Rudy explained that he had no plans. And so Mr. Pomeroy called Mesa Community College at that moment and signed Rudy up to take the GED the very next day. He didn't stop there. Mr. Pomeroy picked up Rudy the next day and drove him to MCC, helped him sign in, and waited while he took the GED. He did this for 2 days, since it was a 2-day exam process. The next day, when Rudy found out he passed, he was ecstatic. He had passed without any preparation whatsoever. And he began to leave, and Mr. Pomeroy stopped him and said, "Rudy, where are you going?" Rudy told him, "We're going home." He said, "No, we're going to register for classes now." So Mr. Pomeroy took him to register for classes and told him he would pay for his first classes, his books, and his materials. Next, however, came the question of how Rudy would work while going to school. Mr. Pomeroy, however, had heard about a position at Spreckle Sugar Company as a night shift position as a security guard, and he encouraged Rudy to apply. Again, he drove Rudy to the interview, and Rudy was immediately handed a uniform. And now Rudy could work during the evenings, during night, and go to school during the day. During this time, Rudy did not give up on his dream of becoming a police officer. And so he continued to apply. He applied to the Chandler Police Department. However, he couldn't pass the written test. He applied to the Pinal County Sheriff's Office, but he didn't pass the interview. Rudy was discouraged. But he still had Mr. Pomeroy there cheering him on. And at one point, Mr. Pomeroy heard about a position with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office as a detention officer. Again, he encouraged Rudy to apply, and this time he got the position. Rudy went on to become a police officer and achieve his dream. Not only was he a police officer, he was a decorated police officer. He also became a husband and a father. And he continues to work in law enforcement to this day, helping individuals and families come to the United States from other countries. And now you've met my dad, who happens to be here. This is a fan chart. This is a type of family tree, and that's me in the circle. When I look at this family tree, my dad's story of hope plays an important role in this tree. But when I look at this tree, I don't just see one story of hope, I see many stories of hope. In the social sciences, we talk about intergenerational transmission, the fact that positive and negative behaviors and attitudes and beliefs and roles and perceptions can be passed down from generation to generation. And hope is like that. I can see hope passed down through this family tree. So I'd like to take a moment to tell you about another member of my family tree, Janos Boda, and his sons and grandsons. Janos came to the United States in about 1903, and he was shortly followed from Hungary, and he was shortly followed by his wife and his 3-year-old son. Unfortunately, 3 years later, Janos and his wife's 19-year-old brother died in a coal mining accident, leaving a wife with a 6-year-old son and a new baby daughter in a country that was still relatively new to them. However, despite those difficult circumstances, his son and my great-grandfather inherited a courageous spirit. And he ended up working for the auto union in Detroit, for which he was arrested. He taught himself how to fly an airplane. He started his own business repairing pipe organs in theaters, and when that wasn't needed, he began building and selling his own pipe organs. His son, my grandfather, also worked in the family business. He also learned to fly an airplane. And when he had to move to Arizona for his daughter's health, he became an air traffic controller, where, like his father, he fought for workers' rights by helping to start the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Association organization. And as I look at these fathers and sons, I can't help but to see hope shared between them and hope passed down between them. Similarly, when I hear stories about my great-great-grandmother, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mom, I see stories of hope that have been shared with me and now shared with my children. So now, here's the million-dollar question. Why have I subjected you to perhaps one of the greatest fears you have, a family slideshow, and stories from my family. I've got 3 reasons. First, I believe that generational stories of hope are an important seed of hope that we often overlook and underappreciate. I hear people talk about hope DNA, that component of hope that lives within each of us. That certainly does not require actual shared DNA to be a part of us, but it does serve as an important reminder that each of us has hope within us, and likely at least some piece of that hope has come from people who have come before us. We know that the experiences of one generation, hunger, poverty, stress, can influence, and not only influence, but change their DNA. Not only that, those changes in their DNA can be passed down to subsequent generations. On the more positive side, I believe hope is like that. Hope DNA can change across generations. When I hear stories about my dad, my great-great-grandfather, my mom, I not only feel inspired, but I feel hope, and I feel a recognition for the hope DNA that I have within me, and I can pass that on to my children. Of course, when I hear these stories, I also hear stories of heartache, of struggle, of loss, of mistakes. But despite that, or sometimes because of that, I see achievements in relationships that developed, and that only further fortifies my hope and the hope of my children. Stories of people I've never met can change my hope DNA. Second, I share these stories with you because I believe generational stories of hope highlight the role that others play in our lives and the long-lasting effect that that can have. Often, in a moment, the consequences of a simple action can be invisible. However, time gives us the perspective to see how simple actions can grow across time and across generations. When I look at Mr. Pomeroy and the actions that he did for my dad, he likely never realized the oak tree that could grow from that small seed that he planted. And that not only influenced my dad, but me and my children. Finally, when we talk about generational stories of hope, it gives us an opportunity to reflect on our role in generations of hope. Do we know the stories that have come before us? Do we know the stories that we have? Do we recognize them as important and valuable? We all have stories of hope, no matter how large or small, but do we recognize them? And do we take time to plant seeds of hope in those around us, whether by sharing stories or by small and simple actions for others? My wish is that each of us can recognize our role in generational stories of hope, that we can learn the stories of hope that have come before us, that we can recognize our own part in stories of hope, and that we can take time to plant seeds of hope in those around us. All of us are interested in creating hope in a single child because it's important and because it matters. But we should never underestimate the value and the long-reaching effects that inspiring hope in one child can make. We can be changing generations of hope because of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you.